Hello Internet, and welcome to a new tutorial. Even though it's almost 10 years old, Serum is still the go-to synthesizer to many of us, including me. It sounds good, it's versatile, it has nasty filters. I mean, it does what it does really good, and there's always a way to make new, fresh sounds out of it. And over the years, I've developed my own workflow with it. It's just a bunch of habits and shortcuts that not only saves me time, but are an essential part of my sound design process when using Serum, because they help me take the right decision to get where I want to be. So I've condensed these habits and shortcuts into 10 tips and tricks that I want to share with you in today's video. So let's just jump to the desk and check what they are all about. And by the way, I've kept the best to the last, so make sure to stay around. Tip number 1, bass-ready saw wave. So if you're familiar with the processing of a modern Psytrance bassline, you know that in order to get the right timbre, we need to apply artificially phase distortion on the signal, whether by using multiband distortion, multiband saturation, or just splitting the frequencies of the signal into several bands. Now, I've already made a full tutorial on how to create a modern Psytrance bassline. You can check it out in the description. But what we can do in Serum, it allows us to create a pseudo phase distorted saw wave right from the beginning, right from the oscillator, that will help us with the processing and gives us a really nice timbre to work with. Check this out. Here I have a really basic bassline. Sounds like this. Pretty neat. Now let's go to the wavetable editor in here. See, we have this upper window that controls the harmonics of the waveform, and the second one actually controls the phases of the waveform. Now what we need to do, right click on the phases window and we will ask it to generate a saw. See, it already generated this really weird saw. Now let's flip it horizontally and vertically. And now we have this pseudo phase distorted saw wave. Let's check it out on the scope. Sounds pretty neat. And as you can see, we have already a pseudo phase distorted saw wave, meaning we need to apply less effects than we usually do to get to the right shape and the right timbre. And this means that eventually we will have less problems caused by the processing that we will apply to it. Now that said, let's add some multiband distortion from Serum 2, and with the kick, we will get this. Tip number 2, precise envelope values. This is really useful, especially when working with basslines. Let's say we want to synchronize our decay to our grid. We want the decay to have a duration of exactly 1/16th note. Well, Serum allows us to do so and actually calculates the duration in milliseconds according to our BPM. And all what we have to do is double click on the decay window in here in milliseconds, type 1/16th, for example, and it already calculated it for us. And actually this works for the attack, for the hold, decay, and for the release. And now the duration of my decay is exactly 1/16th note according to my BPM, which is 149. And we get this. And speaking of Serum's envelope, and this is an extra pro tip, the best release time is actually 5 milliseconds for both the amp envelope and the envelope opening the filter. And why 5 milliseconds? Because this is the sweet spot between not having longer notes that will overlap with each other's and not creating artifacts because the notes are really short. Tip number 3, make everything sound foresty and like really dark. This trick works really well with the harmonic series kind of wavetables. You can find this one in Serum's default wavetable folder. Now, let's set the table position to somewhere in here. We have this basically. And the whole trick lies in the unison detuning. So what I'll do, I'll crank the unison count all the way up. Now I have 16. Now you can avoid going to 16 because it's pretty CPU intensive, but don't go lower than 6 voices. It's the bare minimum, okay? So what I'll do, I'll detune these voices and check what we have. Okay, we're getting into the spooky territory, but what if I go to the global in here and set the range to 48? And now we have this. We basically have a bell sound. Now, let's go back to global in here, set the mode to random. This means that every time we play a note, Serum will randomize the detuning of these 16 notes. So now we will get this. And with a random arpeggiator, we'll have this. Now let's push things forward and modulate the detuning of the oscillator in here. I've already added modulation from the first LFO to the detuning in the matrix. So if I'll crank it all the way up, we'll get this. This is getting pretty weird, but you know me, this is not enough. I'll modulate the chorus pitch of the first oscillator. I've already added in the modulation matrix a note on random to the chorus pitch. So I'll crank that modulation and now we have this. Now this is pretty dark and spooky. Let's add a bandpass 24 decibels per octave filter. As the usual, give it some drive, give it some resonance. And I've modulated the cutoff with the second LFO like this. And I've added some note on random on it just to give it some variation. Check this out. In the modulation matrix, you can see them. Now let's crank the modulation all the way up, just like this. And I'll add a 1/8 dotted ping pong delay like this. And now, with the kick and bass, we'll get this. Number 4, using Serum's delay as a resonator. And actually, the delay has a really nice trick up its sleeve. Check this out. Here I have a preset from my latest Serum preset pack, Psyche Volume 2. It sounds like this without any processing. Okay, pretty nice. I've just turned off all of the effects in here. So I'll keep this filter off. Let's say we want to use this filter for another reason than actually being a resonator, but we still need a resonator. Well, I'll use the delay for that. Check this out. I'll turn it on. I'll set the BPM in here to 1/32, right? Give it some feedback, and now we have this. Okay, that's pretty nice. But what's really interesting with the delay is that it has this filter in here. And now what we can do is actually sweep the frequencies that it's resonating, right? Check this out. See how we can control the timbre of these resonances and actually make them way more interesting. Now what we can do is, let's close this filter a little bit and let's modulate the cutoff with an LFO. I'll just go to the matrix in here and set the modulation amount to somewhere like this. Like I don't want a lot of modulation. And now we have this. Pretty interesting, but we don't have a lot of resonances, and we can control them actually not with the feedback, but with the Q or the bandwidth of the filter. Check this out. Now, you guessed it, we will add a random modulator on the Q or the bandwidth of the filter and we will get random resonances. I'll use the second chaos for this task. And I'll just set it to modulate somewhere like this. Like I don't want a lot of resonances so the sound won't go nuts, right? So now we have this. Now we can add a 1/8 ping pong delay to it, and with some kick and bass, we'll get this. Now that's pretty weird, and actually we can push things forward by setting the delay to ping pong, and we get like this really nice stereo image that the comp filter from the filter, won't gives us. Check this out. I've used this trick so much in Psyche Volume 2 because it opens up the possibilities that you can get from this delay, and actually it opens up the stereo width of the patches. Tip number 5, using the chorus as a way to add textures and really weird artifacts to the sound. A chorus in a nutshell is a bunch of delays that are being modulated by an LFO. Check this out. Here we have delay number 1, delay number 2, and there's their feedback control. You can't add the delay without some feedback. And here we have the LFO rate and the depth of this LFO. And we also have a low pass that can turn into a high pass filter, but this is an extra inside of Serum's chorus. Now, since it has delays and they go as fast as 20 milliseconds and as slow as basically 0 milliseconds, we can use the chorus as a resonator. But since it wasn't designed as a resonator, we can really push it forward to get some weird textures out of it. I mean, check this out. Here I have a preset called Rhythmic Black Hole from my first preset bank for Serum, Psyche Volume 1, and it sounds like this without the chorus. Pretty dark. Now let's add the chorus to it. Did you hear those really weird artifacts and textures created from the sound? And it's all by modulating the rate of the internal LFO with really quick delays, some depth, and a lot of feedback. And you can see that I've controlled the high end of the sound by closing the low pass filter just a little bit. Here I have another example from Psyche Volume 2 for Serum, and it sounds like this without the chorus engaged. Now, when I'll engage the chorus, as you can see, we have a fixed rate of 2 bars for the internal LFO, a little bit of depth, but I was modulating both of the delays with 2 different modulators, and for sure there's a lot of feedback. See, we didn't only add weird artifacts to the sound, but we've actually added movement and made it way more interesting than without the chorus. Tip number 6, create humanized modulation from wavetables. So we have this FM patch in here, sounds like this. Sounds pretty nice. I want a humanized modulation on the cutoff in here, but I don't want to record an automation line for whatever reason. What we can do, we can find a wavetable that looks like this. This is a wavetable I've already created some long time ago, and hopefully one day I'll release my wavetable pack, but till then, what we can do, we can actually send it to the first LFO in here. Check this out. If I right click on the folder in here, I can ask it to send wavetable B to the LFO. And now we have the shape of the wavetable basically in the LFO. Let's turn off the oscillator like this. Let's modulate the cutoff with our LFO. Let's set the LFO to something slow, maybe 2 bars. And now we have this. That's too fast. Let's set it to 4 bars. That sounds pretty humanized coming from a machine. And now what we can do, add a tiny bit of sample and hold just to make it a bit more interesting with a note and random. I'll go to the matrix in here, set the modulation to just a tiny bit and bipolar. And now we have this. I think it sounds way better with the sample and hold. And with the kick and bass, we'll basically get this. Tip number 7, creating FM sounds using the remap function. So I've already made a full tutorial on this technique, I think like a couple of years ago. I'll leave a link for that in the description. But essentially, it's the continuity of tip number 6. I mean, what we can do, basically, we'll go to the oscillator in here. Let's choose the SSQ wavetable. So now we have this. Let's set the wavetable position all the way to the right. And now let's send the wavetable to the LFO. Now what we can do, we can save this shape and basically we can use it to modulate the wavetable of the first oscillator. Because if I'll take off the remap, check what we have. Just a simple sine wave. So basically from a blank sine wave that sounds like this to full FM wizardry using the remap function. And if we change the shape of the oscillator, we'll get different results. Check this out. I'll set the remap to 0. Shape number 2 is a saw wave. And now we have this. Let's keep it on a saw wave. Let's add the filter back. And now we have this. And with kick and bass, we'll get this. And what's pretty interesting about this technique is that, first of all, we have 4 different remap algorithms to get 4 different timbres. And And what's really interesting with this technique is that now we can free up the other oscillators from their FM duties and actually use them to add more timbre, more movement, more textures to the sound. Tip number 8, resample last played note. Now this tip is a lifesaver, especially when dealing with random patches, and we have a lot of them in Psytrance. So let's say we have this random patch, like this patch called Spooky Grooves from my Psyche Volume 2 Serum bank. Now this is a random atmosphere. Every time we play a note, a different sound will be generated like this. Now, let's say I want to sample one of these notes to, I don't know, use it in a sampler or just stretch it, mangle it, create another texture out of it, whatever. I just want to sample it. Because this is a random atmosphere, what we can do is play different notes till we find the one that we like. Let's say this one. Okay, this one. And then we hover over the Serum logo in here, and there's this little icon that will appear. We have to click on it and drag it outside of Serum. And now what Serum will do is create a sample in the renders folder inside of Serum's preset folder. Check this out. If I'll go to my samples in here, I already have a render of this note that I've just played. And now I can just drag it and drop it in here. And as you can see, there's the processing on it, there's the tail of the reverb, and now I can do whatever I want with this sample. Tip number 9, sorting things in the modulation matrix. Now, I don't know why I didn't know about this feature in Serum till lately, but hear me out. In a demanding style like Psytrance, patches can get pretty complicated really fast, and we'll have like a lot of modulations going on in the modulation matrix. And sometimes finding a modulation can get pretty tricky. So what we can do, we can go to the modulation matrix, and as you can see, there's a lot of modulation going on. And now if we click on this little icon here, we can sort things by source or by destination. And this saves us a huge time. Check this out. Now everything is sorted by source, and we can do the same thing for the destination. Tip number 10, using the multimode filters. Now, these filters, I don't know why, are so under the radar. I barely see people using them, and yet these filters have so many flavors to offer us. I mean, they remind me of the way I used to use my Virus A. See, the Virus A didn't have any phaser, but I was able to create kind of like a fake phaser effect by combining a notch filter and a low-pass filter. And this is actually one of the really nice ways to add a bit of a bite of a phaser to the sound without actually adding a full phaser. Check this out. Here I have this FM patch. It sounds like this with a classic bandpass 24 dispatch per octave filter. Pretty nice, but let's go to the multi-filters in here and let's add low pass and notch. So now we have a low pass that we can control with the cutoff frequency and a notch that we can control with the second frequency knob in here. Now let's close them like this and let's control them with a macro, just like so. Let's open them almost all the way up. And now we basically have this. Let's open the filter a bit more like this, a bit more on the notch. See that timbre that we just got? Now with the kick and bass, we'll get this. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Check how many multi-filters we have and we can play with. These were my 10 tips and tricks for Serum. I hope they improve your workflow and save you some time as much as they do with me. And if you like my content for Serum, check out my presets pack for it. They are on my Gumroad, link down in the description. And with this is the end of this tutorial. I really hope you've liked it. I really hope you've learned something new. See you next time.